Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Sister Sister, a podcast for spiritual baddies. We're your hosts, El and Amaya, and today's episode will be about
Theurgy, which that is the way that it is apparently pronounced. I've also heard people call it Theurgy, so take that with a grain of salt. I looked up the academic pronunciation of it, but we're also going to be talking about how this is like considered pagan salvation and then comparing it to Christianity at the end. But just to, start off, what is theurgy? It is the art or technique of compelling or persuading a god or beneficent or supernatural power to do or refrain from doing something. So I know that we've talked about deity work. This is kind of like taking it a step further, where like you're in control influencing the entity rather than that like having a working together partnership. It's kind of the best way to explain it. So, where you have a lot of like historical context to go through. So, I'm gonna start with like the beginning of theurgy, and then I'll kind of let Amaya go into a more like kind of overview explanation of like how it developed, and then we'll continue on from there. There's a lot of information, and we hope that it makes the most sense the way we have it organized. But as always, everything will be linked if you guys need it because it's a lot. And there's not a lot of sources that aren't the actual theurgy texts. So I was wading through piles of information for this episode. So Plotinus the Egyptian, which this was around 204 to 270 AD, was born at Lycopolis or modern Assuit in the Nile Valley and educated in Alexandria. He is the architect of all later theurgy, so this is where it starts. He wrote the Enneads, which are the documents for theurgy, where he lays out the three hypostasis, one, intellect and soul, and the movement of procession, descent, and return that underlies theurgic, I think that's how I said that, theurgic rites. His account of Henosis gave theurgy its philosophy grammar. To approach the one, the soul must become like what it seeks, since it already bears the seal of its source. All things that proceed from the one hold a moment or node of its unity. And the one is representing like a higher power, just to like put that into easier context. Plotinus establishes that the soul approaches the gods by becoming like what it seeks to know. And his own image, we cannot see the sun of ultimate reality unless we become sun-like. This idea shapes his account of virtue and intellection. The philosopher therefore trains the soul for higher vision, developing what he calls inner wings. He also insists that happiness cannot be divided among many lesser aims. It must be directed toward the highest good, since a jumble of goods would mean pursuing several ends instead of one final end. The soul gathers itself around a single principle. And basically, what this is you have to be able to reunite to the one higher power at the end of your life. Just to give you guys a little bit of more layman's terms. And then I'll let Amaya go into like overview of how we got from there to like the more modern day theurgy with like Plato and things like that.
Theurgy flourished in the 2nd and 3rd century CE, deeply entwined with Neoplatonism, a philosophical tradition reviving Plato's teachings fused with spiritual mysticism. Leading Leading figures like Proclus and Iamblichus developed detailed rituals aimed at awakening divine sparks within human souls. Theurgy served as a spiritual counterculture to rising Christianity and shifting political religious landscapes. The last pagan emperor, Julian the Apostate, embraced Theurgy as his weapon in the battle to preserve ancient pagan wisdom and ritual. These rites combine prayers, sacred chants, sacrifices, and symbolic acts designed to invite gods to temporarily inhabit human bodies. What sounds like fantasy was a serious, revered discipline promising visions, enlightenment, and immortality. At its peak, Theurgy promised entheos, divine possession, a state where the god temporarily inhabited the practitioner. For Neoplatonists, it was not an illusion but an experiential union, transforming morality, conscience, and identity.
So that very much so is like kind of the idea that we see of like someone channeling a god or goddess in current day, except you're actually trying to like let them fully take over your body as like their vessel. Okay. So now we're going to talk about theurgy specifically in Platonism. The Neoplatonist, and it's Iamblichus, starts with an I. I also did not realize that initially. Wrote prolifically on the subject of theurgy and ritual magic. He considered the Egyptians to be much closer to divinity due to their cultural and religious utilization of ritual that he felt mimicked the divine most closely. Iamblichus wrote in a tumultuous period where Hellenic religion was under attack by Christian influence, and many saw him as the savior that would reignite the spark of the Hellenic religions. For all of the conflict between pagan and Christian religion and philosophy, Iamblichus was more concerned about the clash between the older, ancient traditions that he felt came from the gods and the newer, man-made traditions that were attempting to supplement them. His goal then became to reinforce the bond and closeness between gods and men. This is why Iamblichus praised the Egyptians. He felt that they maintained these original connections through their traditional ritual theurgic practices, while his own culture and the up and coming Christians had changed the rituals to suit their own needs. Iamblichus saw this time and time again where a religious group would simply take over a temple, use the same rituals and prayers, but simply change the name of the deity being worshipped. Iamblichus sought to use the Egyptians as a template for his own theurgic writings applied to this Platonic philosophy. So now we're going to be kind of talking about the philosophers that Iamblichus then kind of influenced and what progressed the theurgic concepts along.
Their philosophers who studied under Iamblichus' view of the human soul was a humbler one than that of Plotinus. Plotinus?
Plotinus, yeah.
Plotinus. I was like, I think that says, okay. So, was humbler one than that of Plotinus. It was for them a spiritual being of lower rank which had descended altogether into the material world, while for Plotinus a part remained above. They could not therefore aspire like Plotinus to through philosophy alone to that return and to an unification with the divine that remained for them the goal of human life. Help from the gods was needed, and they believed that the gods in their love for humanity had provided it, giving to all things the power of return in prayer and implanting even in inanimate material things, herbs and stone and the like, sympathies and communications with the divine, which had made possible the secret rites of theurgy, through which the divine gave the needed spiritual help by material means. Theurgy, through its procedures, were generally those of late Greek magic, was thus not thought of as was thus not thought of merely as magic. In fact, a higher and more intellectual theurgy was also practiced. The degree of attention paid to external rites varied considerably from philosopher to philosopher. There seem to have been thinkers even in the last generation of pagan Neoplatonists who had little use for or interest in such things and followed a mystical way, much of, like that of Plotinus.
So, much like in the pagan traditions and the, I guess, Egyptian traditions, Judaism also had a form of theurgy that they used. And this was specifically in Jewish mysticism. So, we're just going to give a little bit of context about that because it's not entirely what we're talking about. But it is related because, as you guys know, Judaism came before Christianity in the, span of religions. So it very much so was something that was practiced kind of all over as a whole in different religious sectors prior to Christianity and the modern Abrahamic religions coming about. So the term mysticism applies to the attempt to establish direct contact independently of sense perception and intellectual apprehension with the divine, a reality beyond rational understanding and believed to be the ultimate ground of being. Since mysticism springs from an aspiration to join and grasp that which falls outside ordinary experience, it is not easily defined. There is no clear boundary line between mysticism and metaphysics, cosmology, theosophy, which is a system of thought claiming special insights or revelation into the divine nature, occultism, and theurgy, or even magic. Theurgy was woven into the fabric of many beliefs that surrounded the mysticism in Judaism, much like the metaphysical and witchcraft was also very much so combined into those practices. Now we're going to continue on the explanation and defining some other terms that are related to theurgy, and then we'll get into the actual process that they did to practice this.
So, the sacred art, a salvific faith arising from the religious professional class of the Hellenized Eastern Mediterranean, wherein philosophical contemplation and traditional religious rite are partners in the soul's immaterial ascent to God. The term defines the term identifies both a method of prayer and the religion as a whole. Reason governs the interpretation of religious experience. Rite provides the reliable vehicle for achieving it. Plotinus first furnished Theurgy with its philosophical grammar by establishing that the soul approaches what it seeks by becoming like it, and that happiness cannot be distributed among competing aims, but must converge upon the single highest good. Iamblichus made explicit that contemplation alone is insufficient. The soul cannot achieve henosis by intellect unaided, but must be elevated through sacred rites which purify order and awaken its native affinity for the divine. Hermes confirms both. Without philosophy, devotion cannot reach its heights. Without devotion, philosophy cannot reach its fullness. Through ritual, through ritual and petitionary prayer, the Theurgist forms bonds of friendship with daemons and angels along the Sierra, who assist the soul's reversion to its source, since all that proceeds from the one desires to return it and returns only by pursuing likeness to it. This ascent is the flight of the alone to the alone, and simultaneously a public duty fulfilled on behalf of the whole cosmos. Gnosis is granted by the gods when the soul has prepared itself to receive their grace. Theurgy is, in sum, the art of that preparation.
Now we have the concept of demiurgy, which is kind of something that goes along with theurgy, and for the rest of it, it's important to have this context. So we're just going to give the explanation of that as well. And this is the imitation of the gods in creative work specifically, the sacred dimension of arts, sciences, trades, and skills, insofar as they are practiced as acts of devotion that mirror the demiurge's fashioning of the cosmos according to the eternal forms. As theurgy is directed toward henosis through rite and contemplation, demiurgy, demiurgy is directed toward henosis through craft and making. The demiurge who Hermes calls the mind most wise and everlasting, and whose Egyptian names are Amun, the hidden cause, Ta, the infallible craftsman, and Osiris, or Osiris, whichever way you pronounce it, the generator of goods, brings the invisible Logi to light by impressing form upon matter. The Theurgist, as artisan, imitates this act whenever his work is pursued with piety, moral integrity, and desire for likeness to the One. Each soul descends into embodiment along a sierra whose leader god determines its natural affinities, talents, and domains of excellence. Happiness, happiness consists in discerning that Sierra and pursuing the studies and works proper to it. Mastery of one's proper craft draws the artisan into immaterial proximity with the patron deity of that domain, making the Sierra visible through the quality of the work itself. Demergy, I'm going to say this so many ways in this episode. Demergy has three elements: contemplation, by which the soul sees the chain from God into becoming and is drawn upward; moral craftsmanship, by which that vision takes form in the matter shaped by reverence; and liturgical invocation. That was not right. And liturgical, oh my God.
You said it
It's
right
the,
the first time.
did I?
Yeah, liturgical.
That's not how we said it in my Catholic church.
Interesting.
Because it was always pronounced the liturgy and it was the liturgical. Yeah, is how they said it. All right. I guess I can just say it the way I said it the first time. And liturgical invocation, by which the artisan's labor is tuned to the logos that orders the heavens. When these unite, the theurgist becomes a vessel through whom the gods work. The finished work is then a synthema, a material disclosure of the eternal principles that sustain reality, and a rung in the soul's ascent. So the two concepts kind of work together to create a version that leads you to theurgy, but initially is imitation and specifically goes through one god or goddess, whereas theurgy is to the overall highest power that kind of oversees it all.
Now we're going to talk about the hieratic rites. There, there are three general kinds of theurgic worship, and these have been designated by Iamblichus as material. These have been designated by Iamblichus as material, a medium that uses both material and immaterial. The first introduces us to the gods, the second connects us to the divine in demiurgy and intuitive knowing, realizing the benefits from the divine through participation, and the third brings about henosis. Each level of theurgy should be performed in relevancy to the amount one's soul has remembered itself. Number 1. Material theurgy. Material worship involves the use of material or physical tokens, synthemata, symbols, and other offerings to raise ourselves to the cosmic divine intelligible and tertiary causes, such as archons and daemons. This kind of theurgy is the type most commonly practiced and introduces us to the gods. Median third. Median third. Oh my god, why can't I say it now? Median theurgy. The median class of worship employs both physical and immaterial tokens to unite ourselves with the liberated divine intelligibles. This form of theurgia is more rarely practiced only by those who are beginning to move beyond the need for material worship, engage in median theurgy. This form of theurgy connects us to the divine in demiurgy and intuitive knowing, realizing the benefits from the divine through participation. This form of theurgy involves worship of the hyper and cosmic or liberated gods and employs an intermediate form of sacrifice. While material sacrifice such as that of animals or material foods might be appropriate to material theurgy, they are inappropriate to median theurgy. Instead, intermediate forms of sacrifice are offered that, while material is nonetheless material than bodies. This includes hieratic characters and symbols, possibly talismans, divine names and images, incantations, and musical compositions. All these depend on the physical world since things such as names cannot be spoken without lips to utter them or air to vibrate them. However, they are a kind of materiality that is less material and more refined than the sacrifice of bodies. The hypercosmic gods are those who tend to receive barbarous names of invocation or barbara onomata, are frequently directed to those hieratic names with no human meaning, but are instead of divine origin and so have meaning only to the gods. Third is immaterial theurgy. Immaterial worship involves the use of purely spiritual tokens without the use of physical symbols or ritual. The purpose of immaterial theurgy is to unite ourselves with the immaterial gods. This form of theurgy is rarely practiced, as only the most advanced souls, the theurgic sages, engage in it. This type of theurgy brings about henosis.
All right, so now we're going to go into ritual practices and the philosophical discourse and how they kind of work together. And then I will continue into some basic signs and symbols. So, in theurgy, philosophical discourse and religious ritual are partners in faith. Plotinus described the mystic ascent as a flight of the alone to the alone, as mentioned before, which is achieved by turning inward. Iamblichus placed his emphasis more on ritual since the soul cannot fulfill henosis by intellect alone. There's a motorcycle. All right, I'm gonna redo that part because I guarantee my mic picked that up. Okay. Iamblichus placed his emphasis more on ritual since the soul cannot fulfill henosis by intellect alone and must be elevated through theurgic rites as well. These two philosophers are commonly placed at odds in the contemporary discourse, but they are reconcilable. Hermes concurs, including both discourse and ritual in his perceptions and his prescriptions on religion. So, some signs and symbols, and this is like kind of a long portion, but this is like the main symbol and kind of how it works within theurgy. So, we have the ladder of the soul's ascent. In Plato's dialogues, Diotima of Mantina appears in a memory of Socrates. When he was young, she was one of his most influential teachers. She was a priestess and a philosopher who instructed Socrates on topics of love and beauty. She introduces the ladder of love, which is an allegorical ascent where an individual begins by loving physical forms and gradually progresses to the and gradually progresses to love the form of beauty itself. This ascent involves stages of appreciating beauty in increasingly abstract forms, starting from physical beauty to the beauty of souls, to the beauty of activity and civilization, and finally to the beauty of knowledge and eternal principles. Diotima's teachings emphasize Eros as a means of accessing higher philosophical understanding and truth. The four steps of this ladder is the beauty of physical matter, souls, civilization, civilization, and forms are put into a hierarchy for different kinds of rites and religious work. Physical matter is equated to material rites, which is the use of physical objects in ritual like altars, iconography, and material offerings. Souls and civilization equate with mindful rites, since souls and the harmony of souls and civilization are both of an immaterial nature. These correspondence with the speaking or singing of hymns, reciting prayers, contemplation of beauty, and broadly the pursuit of dialectical and philosophical mastery. Then contemplation of the forms is the last step in unitive rites, which equate with meditative prayer meant to symbolically bridge the final gap between the nous and the one. The sum of these different kinds of rites is the means by which we pursue henosis. In this way, the ladder is used as a stairway of ritual in the ascent towards the one. Plotinus refers Plotinus references Diotima's ladder by illustrating an ascent from material to immaterial towards the supreme principle of beauty itself, hence the rites that kind of lead you through to the highest point of the Theurgy practice.
Now let's talk about ritual identification and worship. Part of revealing what is hidden is involved in one of the most important aspects of Egyptian religion, ritual identification. Broadly speaking, ritual identification is when the theurgist invokes the names, attributes, powers, and internal cosmogonic actions of a deity in a prayer spoken during rite. This type of invocation is ubiquitous in Egyptian hymns, prayers, no matter if they're from the Pharaonic, Hellenic, or Roman eras. These invocations, as Iamblichus tells us, are a means of divine imitation, which is an essential aspect of the Egyptian religion.
So now we'll talk about some sacrifices and offerings, continuing from the insight that symbols and imagery grant direct access to divine realities. Iamblichus expands on the importance of sacrifice and offering in theurgy. Two complementary principles govern these rites. Myth impresses eternal patterns upon the soul, while cosmic sympathy binds visible tokens to their invisible archetypes, allowing material acts to begin reversion unto immaterial powers. First, he clarifies that sacrifice is not an exchange or an act of repayment to the gods, unlike in a deity worship situation or a deity work situation. Instead of functioning like human social transactions, sacrifice is a tool for purifying the soul and freeing it from lower attachments. Because each ritual element shares a kinship with the god it invokes, purification is achieved through likeness, just as the teaching of Diotima's ladder elevates the lover from physical forms toward the form of beauty, so too do sacrifices guide the Theurgist away from matter toward immaterial union with the gods. Sacrifices and offerings engage the chain of being from terrestrial daemons to the demiurgic powers themselves. Through these sympathetic chains, a single rite ripples upward, uniting the whole hierarchy in one motion. When these levels are activated in ritual simultaneously, their collective energies benefit individuals all the way through nations. In the same way, Diotima's rungs lead upward from the material to the intellectual and eventually to the divine. Sacrificial rites move across multiple strata of being until they I'm just going to reword that. Right. Until they, oh, that's converge. Why was I seeing coverage? I don't know what is wrong with me. All right. Okay. Sacrificial rites move across multiple strata of being until they converge on the highest principle. Each reality contributes a facet of divine life, leading up to a universal participation in the gods' creative and harmonizing powers.
Last but not least, we'll talk about pagan salvation in theurgy versus in Abrahamic religions. The concept of salvation in theurgic paganism differs fundamentally from the Christian or Islamic understanding of being saved from original sin or eternal damnation. Ascent rather than rescue. The soul is not fallen and sinful, rather, it is weighed down by matter and ignorance. Salvation in theurgy is a process of awakening, ascending the cosmic hierarchy, and realizing a union with the Godhead that has always existed. Liberation and deification. The goal is henosis. The goal is henosis, a total communion and eventual identity with the gods.
So, some final thoughts, because that was a lot of information and a lot of like very kind of crazy philosophical concepts. I'm not gonna lie, it's very like out there, which obviously people actually did religiously practice these philosophical concepts into ritual. But I think that for me personally, it was like very out there. I was like, you're going to try and become a god by imitating a god, basically, is what we're saying. And I kind of see where like there's the idea that you eventually will go back, like your soul will go back to the highest being. But in traditionally Egyptian and Hellenic practices, you have so many different gods. So it's kind of begging the question of, is there like the ultimate god, or are you specifically using theurgy with one individual deity that you wish for your soul to reunite with, kind of on like a cosmic level? So for me, I personally found this kind of fascinating because I think it's interesting to see like how much paganism and like traditions have changed throughout the history, but also because of the fact that we have this idea of salvation and being saved from like the original sin in Christianity whenever you're baptized, and then like the idea that, Jesus died for your sins on the cross, but in the kind of theurgy way, it's more so about taking that initiative to save yourself, having to develop spiritually through ritual and a relationship with the gods and the cosmos to be able to save yourself from kind of, I guess, not really just the best way to put it would be not having like a spiritual connection with higher power rather than like damnation to hell. What are your thoughts, Maya? I would like to know.
I think there was a lot to dissect here, and I think it's really interesting by what theurgy is defined as and overall what Plotinus wrote in terms of the hypostasis. And I know, like, basically that's a hypothesis, but it's like slightly different. I also found it interesting that it's like its own rite of passage of sort, and it's just like its own, it's evolved into its own thing. I think what's also interesting is the connection to the Roman, Egyptian, and Hellenic religions and how they kind of all had their own part. And obviously, as you know, like there's Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. So I think it's interesting in some aspects how they all connect into one and are this whole historical piece of mythology. That being said, I think the whole imitation of gods is a really interesting thing. Kind of just like trying to be someone that you follow in a way, but also like just overall benefiting from the god itself was like. something that was like, that's interesting.
I think it's also interesting to specifically looking at it from a philosophical standpoint. I know I personally have like really confusing times like putting dates into perspective whenever it comes to like who was alive when, because I feel like we learn about different things in history, especially in the American education system, where like you think that these people were like super far apart, but actually this person was like 40 when that person was born and like they did live in the same timeline. And it goes back to the idea of the Age of Enlightenment. And while all of these philosophers may not have been alive at the exact same point, they were very close together in, their time as being philosophers. And that's why they all were kind of pulling from each other and why I think it got spread across multiple countries slash continents to be able to be something that was practiced then in more of a like religious sense. But like whenever I think about it, I would never think about like a great Egyptian philosopher being alive even remotely near the same time as Plato, right? Like it seems like ancient Egypt and like ancient Greece are like so far apart where they should be on the timeline because you tend to learn about Egypt first and then go to like Roman Greece, but it's actually on like the same level, just like slightly further apart.
Yeah, overall, I thought it was a really interesting episode and well put together. So kudos to that. But to move on a little bit with the episode, let's get right into tarot time.
All right, let's see what the collective needs to hear today. I really did shuffle these cards very well today because we got a couple, I guess it was two times that the same card came out so far this season, but let's see here. What does the collective need to hear today, Spirit? Oh, the cards don't want to be sassy today, apparently. All right, we have the Four of Pentacles. So, to put it very plainly, the Four of Pentacles is not a bad omen, but also not like the best money omen. It very much so is about like you are feeling stable in your money situation, but because you have gone through some instability, maybe even very recently in your finances, you're kind of trying to hoard every little bit of money that you have and hold on to it whenever like the energy of money has to be an ebb and flow. You have to spend money to make money a lot of times, especially in the world of business. So it's kind of serving as a warning to not be overly protective about your financial situation, make good financial decisions. But, at the end of the day, if you buy a like $2 donut because you want a sweet treat and you have like plenty of disposable income left in your bank account, it's not gonna kill you.
That being said, let's get right into Astrology Almanac.
Tomorrow, Mercury in Leo opposes Pluto in Aquarius. This aspect is not only calling for you to be rebellious, but also for you to be stubborn. While it may be important to go against the system, you might also find yourself in a power struggle while trying to dismantle the established rules. On the 17th, Mercury in Leo will trine with Saturn in Aries. This aspect helps you to confidently take the lead today and aids in making good decisions. Also on this day, Venus in Libra will sextile with Jupiter in Leo. This loving aspect will encourage creativity, peace, and balance to achieve success. Whatever you find yourself doing today, you will find it better when you work together.
Love it. Great message. And I also think kind of ties back to the tarot card of the day. So great messages all around. Love that. Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. And if you haven't already, follow us on socials. We are down to the last 4 episodes. So thank you guys for tuning in this season. This has been a real treat as we celebrate about, I don't know, like 6 years of Sister Sister at this point,
Yeah,
or 5. I think it was 5.
something like that.
5 or 6 years, doesn't matter. Either way, thank you guys for being a part of our journey. We love you guys so much, and see you next time.
Bye, everyone.